So welcome everyone. We're here today because we're here to talk about Vue 3.2 for today's Build with Ben session. So I say, you know what, let's that's not what let's see, the close that, because what we want to talk about is right here. Vue 3.2. So why are we making such a big deal about 3.2? After all, right, it's a minor version. It's not like we've gone from Vue 3 to Vue 4. But the truth is when it comes to this particular minor version, there is a lot to be excited about. And that's one of the reasons I think 3.2 is such a big deal, is that a lot of things have been shipped. So basically, for those who are using Vue 3 at this point, basically the recommendation going forward is just start to upgrade all your dependencies to use 3.2 going forward, because there are some call it minor features that we've released that make it quite like a decent boost from like a performance perspective and that kind of stuff. But we'll talk about that as we go through. So I figure the blog article is there for your reference. So we're not necessarily going to walk through like step by step of everything, but I figure we'll kind of use it as like a guideline for an agenda, so we can kind of talk through different things and then use that as a way to just sort of initiate conversation. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. Oh, I just realized, why is my Descript video is just like hanging out in the bottom over there? Oh, interesting. I think so check this out. So here's Descript has my, I think, face as an overlay, and I guess it's putting it here. So right now it's recording the screen and would theoretically record my face on here with that. But it's a little bit odd because I don't know. I'll mix feelings about that. We'll see how it goes. Maybe for this episode when I upload it, my face won't be in it, but we'll see how it works out. All right, so I was trying to test something earlier and botched, so let me go ahead and delete me from it. And let's go ahead and create a Veet app. Ooh, that was not what I wanted. Okay, so we're gonna create a Veet app because we're gonna use Veet as our basically underlying scaffold to play with Vue 3. So that's gonna go ahead and do that. And I just realized I didn't actually give it a project title. So, that's one of the things I wanted to start doing going forward, actually, is to create repos that are tied specifically to the episode and session, so that people can have that with them. So this is session 12. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just be a little bit, 12? Nah, just 12. All right, so build with Ben 12. We're going to go with Vue, regular Vue, and that's that. Okay, perfect. So we're going to go with build with Ben, session 12. Okay, then we're going to, if this works, actually, let's git init. And it's been init, perfect. And then let's add everything and say this is a config. I always debate whether an init is like a config or a feature. I guess it's technically a feature because there was nothing there before. So add Veet Vue 3 scaffold. All right, wonderful. Now here's the only part where I'm not sure, because I was having a little bit of issues with GitHub earlier. I'm not sure if anyone else was. Build with Ben, public, yes. Will this work? Yeah, something went wrong executing the query. I thought so. GitHub is having problems right now. So no worries, we can commit and do all our stuff here, but just know that when GitHub is up and running, we're gonna go ahead and make sure that there's an actual repo created for this. Okay, that said, let me run yarn to get everything installed. And in the meantime, we're gonna go ahead and open this up in VS Code. All right, excellent. So VS Code is open. It looks like we're good there. This has been installed. So let's go ahead and kick off the dev server. Veet is up and running. Okay, so port 3000. Let's move this over to the third. Let's move VS Code over here. So this, we're gonna bump up a little bit so it's easier for people to see, and the same thing as well. So we go ahead here inside of VS Code. Let's change the zoom level. And I think 2.5 is what I had kind of established as like a good, that might be a little much too. I think we'll be fine. Okay, so if you're having any trouble at all seeing the screen, please let me know. But hopefully this is boosted enough that you have the ability to basically see everything. All right, so first thing first is that script setup is now no longer experimental. So if we go into source, go into app, we'll see that this right here is no longer incremental, so this comment will eventually disappear. So we're gonna go ahead and assume basically if you're here and you're watching and we're talking about Vue 3.2, this is kind of one of your first exposures to script setup, and so we're gonna go ahead and kind of review that as far as what it is. So as far as script setup goes, most of you, when it comes to Vue, are most likely used to this style of syntax, where your components are defined as part of your options of your app, and this has been basically the way things have been done in Vue for all of time. That said, there comes a point where, especially as things like composition API have been introduced, and we're starting to get a lot of optimizations when it comes to what the browser can do and like the engines for JavaScript, then it's a bit question of like, is this really necessary, right? If we think about it from like designing an API perspective, you have actually declared that this is something you want to import. And again, assuming that the compiler can actually understand that like you're importing a component, one would then assume that you actually want to use said component. And so similarly as well, we have, for those who are using composition API in the setup functionality, let's say, again, let's do the, for sake of easy demonstration, the counter example, right? So you have current count, and then you have the desire to want to increment the count. So you'd have your button, and you'd have your click, and you'd have, I can't type today, increment count. So, and then you have increment, right? So we save this, right? Nothing changes. And so, I just realized the hello world, it actually has a count in itself, but that's totally fine. We're just gonna demo this. So setup here, right? What we would have to do is we typically have to do a const current count. And then again, we're just gonna use ref in this case. So we'd have to manually import our helper method from Vue. And then once we have our ref, we would say, oh, we have a method called increment count, where it is a function, and that function will take current count dot value and increment it. And then we have to return current count, and we have to return increment value, because again, from like an API declaration perspective, this actually does make sense, right? You're in a setup function, you're declaring these things, you want to tell the component what it is that you want to use. And so when we save this, we'll see now that if we click on increment, this is working. And to show that this actually did work, I'll make this plus equal 10, for example, and save. And now this should go 10, 20, 30, 40. So this is different from this count. So that's nice. But script setup, along with like, as we see the JavaScript frameworks kind of progress forward, we were thinking like, how can we make, like, basically, how do we improve on the developer experience, right? Maybe it's not necessary for those who are opting into a pure composition methodology to actually go through all this boilerplate, because after all, this is a fair amount of boilerplate. So what was proposed basically is that if you're going to be pure composition API, in other words, you're not using any options, you're not exporting a default object, well, then your answer is, let's just turn the whole block basically into a setup method. And that's kind of the best way to think about it, is that you've now condensed everything, all the options disappear, and now everything is up to you to configure. So what happens in this setup? Well, in this case, we no longer have any object to export, so this disappears. And like I said, we no longer have we're in the setup method already. So this method here, this is redundant. And then once we're in here, though, you might be thinking, okay, well, this means I need to return something, right? And so a lot of kind of discussion has been sort of thought through on this particular end. But in the same way that I was saying that if we're importing a component, really the compiler should, that's the whole point of a single file component, right? You kind of know what's being used, what planned on being used, at least on the theoretical side. Then why couldn't we also use that to infer what's actually being used? So basically, in the new script setup block, this even disappears as well. So now your code consists of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. So if I save this and refresh, and to show you nothing has changed, whoa, I did not mean to hit that. Let's see, let's make this 20 instead. So now you'll see 20, 40, 60, 80, boom, 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 done. And so to Plan's comment here in the chat, absolutely right. There's no more I forgot to return it. I need to do this now. Like it just works. And to me, this is quite a big improvement when it comes to that developer experience, particularly for those who are opting into that pure composition API route. And the nice thing about script setup is since it's built right into Vue, this is something you can opt into at a component level. This is not something where you have to enable on a global level and say, oh, well, this now means that every single component must use script setup. Nope. True to the Vue ethos, you pick and choose what works best in your particular scenario. So in the event you're still in a, not even still, there's nothing wrong with this. Let's just say you want to use both composition API and object options. Sorry, not object. If you're using options and you're sort of in a hybrid mode, then yeah, you wouldn't use script setup, and you can totally still use the setup method and do all the returns and that kind of stuff. So you have sort of like the, call it in some way, best of both worlds, of the hybrid approach. But I know that there are also plenty of code bases right now where a lot more people are moving to pure composition API. And to me, that is what's the most interesting to me, and what I've always loved about the Vue ecosystem is that you have a choice. You have a choice to make the best decision for you and your team and your code base. And so certainly with now the script setup, honestly, this is basically one of a huge improvement. It says now it's stable. It's no longer experimental, meaning it's going to be around. And so, yeah, so that's one of those things that has been released in 3.2. So right up here, we just covered script setup. The next thing I want to try out real quick in here is actually something that is currently in an RFC. So let me do Vue RFC, Vue RFCs. Here we go. And then in the RFCs, there's something called the oh wait, no, it's in pull requests. Ref Sugar, take 2. The idea behind this particular RFC, which for those who are new to the acronym stands for Request for Comments. In other words, they're proposals to what we're thinking about changing or adding to the framework. And so people get to, weigh in on that discussion and say well, what about this? And how about, those kind of things. And it's a nice way for the community to chime in as they want. And so for this particular case, you'll notice that when it comes to ref, one of the problems, and I wouldn't say it, I say it's a criticism because I think it's an extra barrier that I would prefer people not having to jump through, is that when we import ref and use ref, anytime we want to access the value of it, it requires us to basically do this current value dot value and then do the thing. And to me, this is not very intuitive from those who especially if you think about your basic JavaScript knowledge, when you want to assign a variable and you say const my list equals 1, 2, 3, you're not going to say oh, well, if I want to use my list, so const my new list equals my list dot map, dot value dot map, and then we iterate every over item and return item times 2. That's not how you would do it. Normal JavaScript would actually literally just be my list dot map item, and that's why I say normal, because there's certainly ways when it comes to getters and setters, things start to change a little bit. But as far as standard, as low level, or not level, I guess standard JavaScript that most people are used to, this is what they're looking for. And it is for that reason why up until this point, I have basically been recommending that rather than use ref, I really think people are better off using the reactive object, which kind of removes that caveat of needing to access things by dot value. And so I realize for those who don't know what I'm talking about, basically there's a second method here that we could import called reactive. And the way this would work is we would say something like count data equals a reactive object. And in here, we would go current count. And then let's just say current count is 88. And so the reason this is nice is because now if you say we have an increment new count, right? Then this would be basically the equivalent we would write is current count data dot current count plus equals 12. And that to me is a lot nicer from mapping to what we're normally writing in JavaScript. So with that said, there's basically a proposal to have, rather than having to have these helper values, because they'll still exist, as an addition to enhance the experience of writing with ref, what if we had this bit of sugar, basically like a global method ref that allows us to access those things without all that hassle. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that again, and let's go ahead and change this to 50 to make sure everything has changed and saved accordingly. There you go, 5100, we're good. So the idea here is that if we go ahead and prefix this with a $sign, and I think delete this, and I think I delete this and save. Oh, it did not like it. Okay, compiler sugar's experimental proposal must be enabled in compiler SFC options. Oh, how do I do that? Okay, view compiler SFC options. How do I enable that? Let's see. Documentation. Scaffold. I'm kind of curious where that is. If that's because I kind of wanted to play with it. You should steal reactivity from Svelte. You know, thesis. I think all JavaScript frameworks look at the different ones, and so I think this is where some of this has been inspired, as far as like, you know, looking at how others are doing it and where, like, you know, understandably the community is excited about. So Svelte is one of those examples where I know there have been discussions on, like, you know, what are they doing well? And I think this is, honestly, I think that this is a good thing. One of the problems I've recently seen with kind of, it's not even a recent thing, a general trend amongst the tech community is I tend to see this desire of like, who will be the future and who will win the battle? And to me, it's like, well, how about we all solve different problems, have unique requirements. It'd be nice if we could all just keep learning from each other and not worry about like a winner take all situation where like there has to be one that dominates. And I think part of that unfortunately comes from a bit of an artifact where prior to the internet making everything kind of so open and people having access to technology in ways that wasn't available before, it allowed for kind of these, call it, single libraries to really be the dominant force. So the best example of this that comes to mind for me personally is Jquery, in that like there was no, or like in the sense that Jquery really did kind of end up dominating the way a lot of people did build websites for a period of time. And while I'm sure people, I would be shocked if I was wrong about this, historically there most likely are people who try to create alternatives to Jquery, but it just didn't gain traction the way that Jquery did. So that said, yes, things like Svelte, I mean, even things like Petite Vue actually are, I, from what I can tell, inspired from things like Alpine. So, yep. So the thing, let's see. Yes, so thesis with the joke here. Vue 4 without ref or reactive. I mean, remember, the ref or reactive is partially because we wanted people to make their code more performant when they didn't need reactivity. And so I think one of the things, if I'm not mistaken, with Svelte is that it ships its own compiler, I think. So it actually does something different than the normal JavaScript engine. And I think this is a push and pull, right? I don't think this is not a right or wrong thing for the record, this is not a right or wrong thing. I just know that when it came to the Vue approach, we tried as hard to stick with the native JavaScript engine and try not to really mess with that. And this is why a lot of the syntax that we actually see in Vue are designed to be progressive enhancements on what already exists on the web. And so, for example, one of the major criticisms that I think I often see of Vue is like, I don't like the template syntax, right? Like it looks so weird. Let me, like, for example, right? It looks so weird that we have, you know, like when we want to bind something, right, that we have to like do like a v bind or prefix it with a colon, and then we have to be like count equals, and then we have to deal with the you know, quotation marks, and then say this is equivalent to current count. And what we really should have, right, you know, because we're used to JSX, this is what we want. We want the ability to say it's like count equals, you know, this curly brace syntax. This is much cleaner. And I would argue from a like visual perspective and like immediately distinguishing it, it is really nice. It's nice to know that like it's very obvious to me that this is different from the HTML spec. But I'd also argue that this is also like, this ends up becoming a little bit of a problem when it comes to progressive enhancement, right? Like if I'm not mistaken, in the history of React, there was a point where you could not just layer it on top of HTML. Whereas Vue from the very beginning was designed to just be able to drop in like a jQuery. And then, you know, if you have server-side rendered HTML, that you didn't have to hijack the entire rendering. Like you didn't have to like ingest the entire DOM, render it to JSX, and then spit it back out. But rather it says, okay, this element already exists, so let's attach fine-grained reactivity to it, or let's attach some dynamic element to it. And this And so this is why I think like it's one of those things where I think if we understand where things are coming from and the decisions behind it, it becomes less I think about preference and more about like like okay, that makes more sense. So I'm looking at the chat right here. Yeah, so thesis here is saying template syntax is totally fine. It's closer to HTML than JSX. Well, brain, I find this way more confusing, but also have never used JSX. So that's the funny thing, right? Is that those who are JSX diehard fans would say that like, yeah, why are you like intermingling like what's clearly going to be JavaScript into HTML? Because like the most common confusion I see with this is when people first vbind for the first time, when they're new to Vue, and they see these quotation marks right here, they basically are like, it's not a string. Because their head immediately jumps to JavaScript. And so for them to having to say, well, this string is not really a string, it's a JavaScript expression. So if I wanted to bind something like what it is, it would be more like I'd have to also do the ES6 template literal and then like, drop the variable in there. And so again, I think if we talk about learning new things, like certainly where you come from can influence your preferences and those sort of things. But rather than see things rather than like a sort of like a negative or like, oh, that's ugly and I prefer this, like understanding the decisions behind it. And more importantly, like whether it makes like are those trade-offs worth it? And to me personally, the fact that Vue, especially with like petite views, so if you haven't heard of petite Vue, I'm just gonna drop a link to y'all for this. This is definitely one of those things that was, I think, inspired by things like Alpine, where basically it is only about 5.8 kilobytes size when you drop it in, and compare that to jQuery, which I think is like 125. It's kind of bonkers. I honestly need to do an entire episode just purely on petite Vue. But the idea with petite Vue and why it's so small and performant, and also if we think about this, I think. No, I'm actually not going to make that analogy. I might be totally wrong. So the thing about petite Vue is that it's designed to literally layer on top of the HTML. Because I believe at one point, when you do stuff with Vue or like a lot of JavaScript frameworks, when you attach it to a node in the DOM, part of the work that had to be done originally was that you had to like kind of copy the template into like the framework, who would then like translate that into the proper like JSX like shadow DOM, kind of like all like the template trees and all that stuff, and then it would update the things accordingly and send it back. The thing about petite Vue, which makes it really awesome, is that it doesn't even do that. It actually just says, oh, the DOM exists already, just like go into the DOM and do your thing. Don't even bother with like re-rendering it or rewriting it and that kind of stuff. So once again, we'll do a whole bit on petite Vue. As the name would sort of inform. As the name would inform you, though, petite Vue is a smaller version of Vue. It's not even just the fact that it's like a smaller bundle size. It's that the features, it is in a sense a subset of features of Vue. So a lot of things, some of the things that you might be looking for in terms of like native transition elements, I believe is an example of this, as well as some other things. Those might not necessarily exist in petite Vue because again, the reason petite Vue was created and is because one, we know that people do still need to use like things like Vue without an actual build step. They might not have the build tools ready because they might still be on a legacy app. But that doesn't mean you can't attach fine-grained reactivity to your app and help to slowly progressively enhance it to the point where eventually it might make sense to actually have a build step. So for those looking at petite Vue, don't just like run off with them. Be like, oh, we can do everything Vue can at like 5.8 kilobytes. It's not. I wouldn't say it's like necessarily feature parity, but it is a fantastic way to progressively enhance an app. So, I see here subway time here. JSX would actually make me leave Vue. I love the similarities between Twig and itself, and it just doesn't fit for me at least. And so that's just it, right? I think subway time, you bring up an excellent point, which is that this here, the fact that, for example, that Vue doesn't enforce JSX on you, I think is one of the, again, we talk about this with earlier, and I think I'll always repeat this because I don't think people quite understand the power of choice when it comes to technology, because I feel like a lot of technology oftentimes forces you down a path. And so it's similarly, like people might say, well, Vue says you should use single file components. And I would say, no, you don't have to. You can, if you want, take all this, abstract this out to a JS file and then just import it. You could abstract all this to a CSS file, then import it. There are plenty of people who do that. You don't have to do it this way. In fact, you're like, oh, well, it has to have a style block. It really doesn't. You want to use a global style, just delete from your single file component, just delete the style block. It's not even like it's a requirement. It's just how a lot of us use it, because we found that it actually really does help our workflow. And more importantly, because I will say this upwards and downwards, and I don't think it'll ever fully pervade out there. If you want to use JSX with Vue, there is a way to do it. And honestly, I think at this point, because I think that's one of the most misleading comments that's out there. It's like, well, I want to use JSX and Vue just only supports templates. And no, it's kind of sad that so much technology has like gotten people to think that like there's one way of doing things when it comes to choosing a tool. And Vue is one of the last, to me, like the fact that it doesn't do that is one of the reasons I continue to support and love the community and the product for what it does. So yeah, so if you want to use JSX, there is a way to do it, and you don't have to use a template if it really does bother you that much. Okay, that said, although I will say the JSX comment is contingent on the fact that you have a build tool. I don't believe you're able to use JSX in the context of like dropping in a CDM and then just doing it. At that point, you might as well have a build step. So, okay, great. We're actually at a good breakpoint for this. So well-brained, yes, love the question. So the question here is, what do you think about the pros and cons about swapping the template and script block? I tried it for one project and actually prefer it now. Funny you should ask that, well-brained. Well, so when I create a new component personally, because right now I'm in a template, like something that was scaffolded. So if let's say we have my component.view. I have my SFC snippet, and that when I hit enter, you'll notice that for now, or not even for now, actually, I've been doing this for quite some time. I do the script block first. And so as like a sort of discussion on this, I think I did a short YouTube video on this particular style. This might look weird for a lot of people who've used Vue for a little while, because the CLI and most standard snippets will always put the template at top. And it was one of the an Emeriti core team member, Chris Fitz, one of the original core team members. He was the one kind of flipped me onto this idea, in the idea that like if we think about our work we do with Vue components, oftentimes we are interacting between like the script block and the HTML, which is very common, but we're actually very rarely interacting the script tag with the style block. So in other words, if you think of this another way, so if I drop the style block back into here, every time we make a change up here, we have to scroll all the way down to get to here. Whereas on the other hand, so you kind of have this not redundancy, you have this inefficiency as far as, call it, scrolling paths. So that's the reason why, if you think about it, for like optimum scrolling, the template kind of really does belong a little bit more in the middle in this regard. For like, if you want to optimize, like minimize like skipping through things and like jumping around, then script template style is technically, I would say, arguably a better scrolling experience. Of course, I'm going to caveat with this because one, for those who are wondering, yes, absolutely, you could just collapse it. And then when you're in styling mode, you're not worrying about the your styles. This is a great way of working around it, because after all, you get that ability to like, now you skip all the JavaScript. You're just worrying about the HTML and CSS, which is great. But I thought I'd show you something, this little bit. I believe it's from the Volar extension, which I think other things like this will be kind of interesting. You'll notice that when I click on it, you'll see it does something kind of interesting. It takes the same file, the app.vue, and it splits it into the script setup automatically on the left. Sorry, not the script setup. The script block on the left. You'll see that the template's on the upper right, and the style block is down below. And so, I realized I need to stand here. I wonder, my hand movements are, I realized, completely lost in this particular window. So I will try to keep it here. So anyway, so I would say left side was the script. Then you have your template, and then your style block below. And what's cool about this is all one file still. It hasn't done anything fancy. It knows where the jump points are. And so it allows you to just work in those various blocks. Now, I think this is cool. And I think it will work for some people. For me personally, I prefer the single view. But this is pretty cool that, like, we can start to think about call it almost reconstructing the views of our files a little bit without like having to break from the single file component. But anyhow, that said, all right, so anyway, so WellBrain, to wrap up my point on that end, I also personally prefer script on top, then your template, then your style. But I would say, honestly, it's based on the preference of the team. I think most people probably won't care when it comes to like switching out the default. And also, more importantly, some people would just literally search and skip down, you know. And I say to each his own, and choose what works best for you. All right, thesis here with a question. Why would you want to use JSX in Vue? People come to Vue to have the rest from JSX. That is a funny take. No, don't get me wrong. I understand you. It's a serious question. So JSX has its value in the sense that, think of it like the where I think JSX is particularly useful when you want to do programmatic, call it programmatic templates. So here's the example. Again, I don't have JSX set up on this, so we're just gonna like kind of pseudocode this. In the event we're creating something called like, I'm gonna rename this actually just to make it so dynamic heading. One of the things I think we all probably encountered inside of our apps is that there are times where an H1 really should be an H2, but it should be an H3, kind of depending on the context of it. And so what you might do when you're doing that is you probably would say, let's just use a script setup block just for practice. And so I'm going to import define props from Vue. And so, okay, so define props, and then we'll just say we get a prop called heading level, and it is a type of number, and then we'll just say the default is 1. So typically what you would probably do if you're using pure template is if heading level equals 1, and then basically use this, and then you would drop like a slot element here. And then you would just like, again, I'm not going to do too much of it because we don't need to, but like this is part of what your template would end up looking like. 2, 3, something like this. And don't get me wrong, you probably could then maybe refactor this to be a little bit, say maybe like component. Like you might be able to like hack it around a little bit. But if you were using JSX in that regard, this is where I think JSX does have its advantage, where imagine if it instead, I think if we were using JSX, this becomes irrelevant. And again, don't quote me on this code, but let's say this is a render function. And then so we would say the render function returns what? It returns a heading with the heading level as the element here. And then we would have our slot like this. And so this is, I would argue, cleaner than sort of the alternative template. And so a lot of component libraries that programmatically generate their templates based on like various configurations, this is where JSX probably makes a little bit more sense, because you're trying to basically figure out how you can make sure all the right things are being generated, whereas managing everything in templates in this regard can be a little bit more sluggish, if that makes sense. I see here from WellBrain, it's like, still looks very weird. I agree. I think for the most part, it will be rare for anyone to really take on a render JSX function. And remember, it's like I said, you kind of have to pick and choose your battles, just because here's the thing, right? Again, I'm going to comment this out, and as just like, again, further clarification, this is just pseudocode. Do not take this as gospel. Okay, here. So for those like, okay, when I commented that this here is, oh, wow, I totally botched that. How do I do this? Okay, great. I commented here that this is inefficient. And I think the quotes are very, very important here, because again, if your team understands how it works, even though it might be a little bit more verbose, honestly, it doesn't really matter. The point of like talking about JSX and making mention of this is that some people would prefer to have like that render one-liner. And if that's the case, that's great. Then they can go figure out how to do that. But for those of us that are thinking, nah, I'm honestly fine with like, because, you know, headings are only 6 levels and it's fine. Then do your thing. I don't think it's, yeah, I don't, I think you should choose what works best for you. Okay. So, okay, I see something. I see Dragon. Hey, how's it going, Dragon Does? Thanks for stopping by. Let's see. Coming. Okay, so subway time. Let's switch back a little bit to the context. Will there be... Okay, this is about the ref sugar. So jumping back over, because apparently I didn't figure out how to do the compiler yet, and I think we'll see how much time before I figure it out. The ref sugar here. So actually, if the ref sugar really does work the way I want it to, it would look like this. And so as a recap, the ref sugar says that you do $ref because it's a global. Basically, think of it as the idea is if you're using Vue and you're using composition API so much that it probably doesn't make sense for you to import ref and things like reactive and compute it every single time. So why not have basically global methods? And this is kind of the idea behind like that dollar symbol, right? Global method in Vue called ref that you don't have to manually import. And then because of the syntactic sugar that we add by using a global variable, we can then just call current count without doing current count.value. Now, subway times question here is, will there be a change to the regular composition API so that the whole value situation will be gone for that too, or is that just in script setup? This is a great question. So from what I understand, subway time, because ref would actually be a global method that's actually attached to like Vue as a whole, then this would mean that ref would actually be available to us even in the setup method within, call it like, if you're in options mode, you're using the setup method, this should still be available to you. I can't imagine that it's only within script setup. But the key, I will say this isn't RFC. So I do think, yes, I don't see why, assuming it's a global one, I don't see why not. That said, though, let me see if I can figure out. Hold up. If I can grab the discussion for you all, because subway time, I think that in case that has not been brought up yet, in case it hasn't, I want to make sure it doesn't. Okay, here. Okay, so let me bring this over. Okay, so here we have the official take 2 discussion on the RFCs. And then we can see here, actually, let me bump it up. I realize it's going to be probably a lot smaller for you all because of the stream. So yeah, the idea is to do refs without value. It doesn't say anything here about doing refs without value, particularly in the script setup. So yeah, so it's funny, like some users specifically lean towards reactive so they don't have to deal with refs. I would be one of those people. So refs, and then also with declare reactively derived variables with computed from ref raw ref. So let ref 0 count compiled output. Yep. Ref computed. And then similarly, computed would be nice as well. So it would also have a macro. So computed. And then it would just do count. They're just so good. I'm so excited if this actually gets, at least even in the state that it's in right now, that is very exciting. So you see function ref 0. So, okay. It doesn't work for nested scope. Disabled by default. Okay. So I will say that the implementation status clearly is only doing it within script setup, but there's nothing to be said about, there's nothing said in the actual proposal that this would be limited to script setup, because this is so beneficial, honestly, that I would be surprised, and I'll try to keep an eye on this in the team conversation, but I would be surprised if they limited it to just script setup. Now, would it be exclusive to the setup method? That is probably true in terms of like JavaScript that's in there. But yeah, because once you're in the options, it really doesn't make sense to like do ref reactive, that kind of stuff. But funny enough, because of subway times question, we have stumbled onto a configuration, which means we might be able to play with it. So I'm very excited. But let me check the chat real quick before we play with this. Ooh, sometimes the camera lags some, like now. Okay. So, well, okay. Oh, it is lagging. I wonder if it's because, hold up. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay. Is this better? This is looking better. Okay, I have a feeling, I think I might know why. Whoa. Okay, so it's recording, but if it's gonna slow down my camera on the stream, that is a no-no for me. Hang on a sec. Camera disabled. Yeah, I just want these two. Did it work? Okay, so I think Descript is recording again. Nope, still lagging. How's it going, Cassidy? I think we're okay. We're playing around with camera lag. I think, yes, we're good. Wave, wave, wave. Okay, I think it's okay, but it's making me a little nervous, so oof, I'm still seeing it. Don't think it's a big issue because the audio is still clear. You know, it's making me wonder. Hang on. I have an idea. Because we're testing things out. We're going to try to make the build with Ben show better. So I'm going to stop the... okay. Cassidy even hidden from the chat in the overlay. So, yeah, Jacob, I believe this is Descript because I've actually done it with ScreenFlow and didn't have any issues. So let me kick off ScreenFlow. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do, because honestly, the most annoying thing for me, does it really make sense to do that? I don't know. Okay, so what I'm going to do, because quality of the stream for me is more important than figuring this out at the moment, is where's my ScreenFlow? I'm going to take ScreenFlow and then we're going to record. Okay, so now hopefully, actually, I just realized I need to, okay, that recorded correctly. Excellent. Okay, starting the recording again. Excellent. Yes, Wellbrain, you all are more important. Figuring out these workflow things, I wanted to test it out, but looks like, yes, okay, much better. I am much happier with this camera speed. Looks like Descript still has a little bit to do. But I would say, though, for those wondering, I am trying to do a lot of different things at once, right? Like streaming, recording, transcribing. So this is not a knock on Descript in any way, because Descript on its own, when you're just uploading video and managing things, and honestly, for most videos, I would say if you're doing things, that it probably wouldn't matter. But the live stream to me is a higher priority in this regard. So that said, let's see. Okay, so I'll do Wellbrain's question actually real quick before we actually start playing with the script setup, the syntactic sugar, because that who knows what kind of rabbit hole we'll get into with that. And so the question here from Wellbrain is in regards to script setup and using it together with the setup method. And so I would say, Wellbrain, when you look at script setup, think of script setup as setup method having taken over the entire block. So there's no more export default. So you don't export anything from this area. So you wouldn't be able to do like, I'm going to do the setup up there, and then in here, I'm going to have like a setup in here. This would, it wouldn't work that way, because at this point you've removed all that boilerplate. The moment you do need options API, yes, you will have to exit the script setup block. So at least for your question, you would never put the two together. Just this alone will get you what you need. All right. So that said, let's go ahead and let's try this ref sugar bit, because I'm actually really excited about this if we can get this to work. So must be explicitly enabled by passing the ref sugar option to the compiler FFC. See the appendix for how to do this. All right. Talk to me. Where's the appendix? It didn't jump me down. Appendix. Ref sugar true. Oh, okay, here we go. Enabling macros. So Veet script ref sugar true. Okay, I can do this. I'm confident in my ability to configure this. So within Vue, there's an option for the script block, and we're gonna say that ref sugar is true. Okay, so I'm gonna save that. That should spin up. Something broke. Let's just see what happens. yarn dev. Okay, that's good. Take two. Oh, I just realized I should drop this in the chat. My apologies. I thought I already did that. All right, there you go. Y'all have it now. So yes, please weigh in on that. See what's going on. Ref sugar take two. We're going to, we don't need that. We need this and this. And so with that, I'm going to make this 2/3, hide the sidebar. Great, dynamic heading can go away. And then we can save this here. And it still doesn't care for it. So to make sure this actually works, let me go ahead and just delete this. Are we good? It did reload correctly. So if I initialize it with 100, that's okay. So that wasn't quite it. Ref sugar take two. I thought I did that right. Did I not? To the compiler option SFC. So within Veet, all right, let's compare. I'm gonna move this to the side, move this to the side, and then we're going into my Veet config.js. Export default define config plugins view takes an object. The object has script. Script then has an object for ref sugar true. Yup, that's it. And then webpack view loader. Okay. All right, so here's what I'm gonna do to make sure it's not me. We're gonna go ahead and stop it. We're gonna go ahead and run yarn again. It's already fine. Yarn dev. And then define process an incomplete macro. Compiler no longer needs to be imported. Oh, interesting. Okay. I will figure that out later. But we're saying this won't work. Broken. Let's take a look for a few more minutes. Did I do it right? Let count equals, I mean, does it have to be let? Okay, fine. Let current count equals that. Oh, wait. I did it. Plan also figured it out at the same time. Okay, interesting. Didn't expect that to happen, but it is working. That is an interesting gotcha. Let's see. Const? Did anyone talk about const versus let? No one mentioned this. No one mentioned the const. Okay, it is here. Ref can only be used with let because it would be pointless to declare a constant ref. Ref can also be used to create a variable like binding for other ref types. So you can do ref computed equals count or even wrap that. Okay, I understand that. If we think about it from a JavaScript perspective, the whole point of a constant is to say that you're this one value and you're really not supposed to change anymore. We all know that this is a little bit odd when it comes to, you know, sort of arrays, objects, that kind of stuff, because it can be a constant, but you can still append properties to it. But when it comes to primitive data like strings and numbers and that kind of stuff, you're technically not you just can't like swap it in and out. So actually, this makes sense. I'm actually okay with this. I do think it needs to be probably surfaced at a higher level so that people will know that it only is used with let, because ref is something that's reactive, that is basically the way at least my mental model of thinking about it is, this is something that is going to change. That's the whole point of making it reactive. If it was never going to change, it should be static. And arguably, what's the point of letting JavaScript do it? It should be a static property. Something that reactive is going to be changed or altered or modified. So let is the only context in which it really makes sense. So I'm okay with this now. Now, what I'm excited about also, though, is let's show something here. Because, I really like this. Because now I don't have to create an entire reactive object to do what I wanted to, which is basically escape the dot value. So let's say we want to show double count, right? So here's the regular count. And here, let's do double count. Actually, you know what? No, double count's boring. Let's do, squared count. That's more fun. Squared count. Okay, So without the syntactic sugar, typically what we'd have to do, and so let's just do it without it for now, is so like this. So let's say like this, and then we want to expose something called a squared count. Yeah, I'm gonna start using let actually for refs going forward as like just a default anyways. So I'm gonna make this one 50 just to show that there's a difference. Square count 50. So great. Okay, if we wanted to make a computer property typically with the standard way of composition API, in other words, what's shipped right now, we would take in a computed method. And what's great about this is that then we can say that squared count is not really a ref. We really want it to be a computed property. And in this computed property, we are going to grab the current count and we're going to actually not even grab it. We're going to return current. And I just realized I can do this all in one line. So I am going to do that because it'll be easier to read. So this function will return current count to the like squared. But because we're using the ref, right? Because if I say this right now, this won't work. You see, not a number. Why? Because current count is a ref. It's not. So you need to do dot value, and then you'll see, haha, everything works. And so if I click on this and increment, you'll see that there's an attached value. Again, not a fan of dot value. So in the world of syntactic sugar, if this works the way I hope it will, so let's start to reverse engineer this or like sort of go backwards. We would start by getting rid of ref. And if we get rid of ref, I'm pretty sure this is going to break, but let's just do like the logic behind it and save. We'll see that it looks like it's actually no. Oh, wait, current count.value here. That needs to change. Okay, increment. Oh, it already works. That's interesting. I did not expect that. Oh, I know why. I know what I'm thinking. Okay, for a second, I was thinking like I needed to use the macro to unwrap, but that's not the case. The reason why there's a dedicated macro, as discussed here in the ref, right here for computed, is because, well, just as a computer property is really, to me, as far as my, like, computer properties save me so much time and mental energy when it comes to calculations because I can trust that as long as there's a single source of truth, computer will do exactly what I want every single time, which is awesome. It's like, it's kind of like functional programming, right? You have a source of truth and you know exactly what does what. And then when one thing changes, things happen perfectly. It's great. But again, not something I really want to import every single time. Whoops. Sorry, that was my fault. Then this means that if we put a dollar symbol in front of this and we save, it looks, oh, this is so nice. Oh man, I am a huge fan of this syntactic sugar. It almost, so again, let me guess this. So let's say we're gonna do a let of a about Ben. And let's do a reactive. I wonder if this works the way I want it to. And then actually, let's just do an array real quick. No, fine. Object's fine. And then we can do like, or we'll just, I just realized about Ben might, all right, let's just do like animes. We'll do a list of animes. And then, not even a list, we'll just do this, reactive. And then we'll just say like current, right? My Hero Academia. So if I save that, oh no, it did not like that. What broke? Something broke. Reactive not defined. Oh, okay. So I may have assumed something that doesn't exist in the proposal. So, oh, okay. So this does mean, right, with this proposal, and honestly, it does actually kind of make sense. There really is no additional value in kind of having the global reactive. So basically, I see. So, I don't know. This is debatable, I would say. I'm going to see. If I refresh, this works. So if I show animes and then show the animes here, there you go, current My Hero Academia, that works. And so what's great about this now is, again, let's just say we have a button that just is like add new anime, and we'll just have a string here. And it'll be a oh wait, I totally botched that. It'll be the name of the anime here, and then it'll be basically Oh, let's just do 2 values, then name, let's see, about, name, whatever. And then we can say animes dot animes pass in the about equals the name. So if, say, for example, we had a button that has a click, and then it does add new anime that passes in awesome, and then do Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Then we save, and then I realize the button has no text, so add FMA. Then if we click on this, yeah, that worked exactly as I wanted to. Okay, great. And so this works because, once again, this, as far as anyone can tell, makes sense, right? Animes is an object. Animes now has an about property that then you set the value to it. Awesome. Okay, this is good. Now, the only thing I'm thinking of, though, as far as because one of the things the team's sort of been discussing is obviously this is a discussion right now, and this is not finalized. So I guess, once again, big disclaimer, this is an experimental request for comment stage. I kind of wonder if it makes sense for there to be a macro for reactive, not because it adds anything additional, but I don't know. It's a bit arguable that ref and reactive kind of go together as a pair. So ref is very nice for the primitives, but you're not really, as far as I can tell, you don't typically attach more complex objects to it. But you know what? What is a live stream if not just trying things out? If I just did a ref like this, would that actually work? Would that really work? It did work. Welp. If that's the case, ref, at least from what I can tell, at least with this syntactic sugar, and I would need to clarify this, it does seem to, it makes reactive, at least from if you're actually in view territory. So I'd be very clear. If you're in the build step of the view territory and you're in the build tools, the reactive helper method almost becomes obsolete. Because once again, I and probably a lot of other people used it as a way to get away from the dot value. But if ref can take all the different data types and then do all the things we want to, as far as it's a reactive ref, then reactive within this particular context is it's done. However, though, this does not make reactive as a helper method obsolete. I think it needs to be very explicit, because we have to remember that the syntactic sugar of view, particularly for this $ref, is meant to be used within the context of view and with all the build tools. That's the key premise to this. What I think is often forgotten about Vue 3 is that it can actually be, the helper methods and its reactivity engine can be broken off to do a lot of other things. And in fact, it was Oscar had an amazing talk, I think, on the VueConf 2019. And so if you want to check out the VueConf US 2019, that's there's actually a recording of this, I think, on the Vue Mastery website. Let me double check this. So conference videos. So shout out to Oscar for this awesome talk. It should be in here. Here we go. This is 2021. I believe it was it 20? I think it was 2020. I'm trying to remember. It is 2020. It is 2020. So Oscar Spencer here. I'm going to drop this in the chat. All right. So it's where he basically he gets the detached view and use it as a backend framework to do reactivity things, which to me is amazing application of how the ingenuity behind a lot of what Vue does as far as attaching reactivity and how it can be used are really not, call it, beholden to the specific context of using it within, call it, web and that kind of stuff. So very, very cool to see this kind of innovation going on. So again, mad props to Spencer. And I'm going to drop this in my notes because I mentioned it and want to try to get better at show notes for these live streams over time when I eventually get everything together so that everything can be published and people have records for everything. But in the meantime, for all of you who are here, I appreciate you being here live. And so hence want to make sure I get those resources to you ASAP. Okay, So we still have some time left in the stream, which because we still got a bit to cover when it comes to 3.2. So once again, keep those questions coming, but let us keep on going. All right. So, did I lose the 3.2 blog post? I think I did. Here we go. All right. We're only in the first one. I admit, partially that is my fault because RefSugar is not part of the original 3.2. It's not part of 3.2 at all. It's just something that kind of was discussed in tandem to the script setup. So that's the reason for that tangent. So actually, also let me try to be better about this too. We're gonna just commit the code we have here. Take status. Actually, we don't need dynamic heading. That's going to get deleted. And then that's good. Git feature, play with script setup, and new RefSugar syntax. Okay, so that's been committed. And that dynamic heading needs to be destroyed. So that's done. Okay, let's talk about the next feature, which I am personally very, very excited about, which is style vbind. And so in other words, you get component level driven CSS styles that have influence from the JavaScript, but not in the way you're used to, right? Because I think most people, right now there's a lot of discussion within the CSS community, I would say the JavaScript CSS community, actually, to be a little bit more specific, on how to almost like to always use JavaScript to do CSS things, in the sense that like you have to write CSS in a so for anyone who's done CSS in a JSX context, it looks kind of like this. It's like if I remember correctly. Okay, so you would have to attach the styles by going like const styles equals, and you do like backticks. At least some of them do, and then it's more like border radius 2 pixels, comma, and it looks different. I don't know how else to put it. Writing CSS within the JavaScript context to me is weird because CSS is already really great, and if anything, we should be enhancing on top of it, not trying to replace the whole thing. So I personally have found that, at least for me, when a system is trying to convince me to write all of my CSS in JavaScript, it just I got a little bit of an X factor for me. So that said, I will say this though, as always, if someone has if you feel, because I'm always curious about it, if you feel really strongly, or frankly you think you have a use case where it actually makes more sense for it to be written in JavaScript over CSS, honestly, I'd love to hear from you, because one of my principles, as I think it's always helped me in my career, and I hope it help others, is just I am ready to be wrong. Honestly, the last thing I want to be is wrong about something and then stay wrong about it. So if there are use cases where it makes more sense for the JavaScript, for it to be written in that sort of JavaScript-like syntax, great, let me know about it. It's a bit like the JSX template discussion, right? I'm a huge fan of template as a whole, but I do see, call it proper cases where, call it the JSX render syntax makes more sense, depending on your priorities. And so I understand that probably using that analogy, CSS can probably be said the same way, where when you want to programmatically generate CSS, you kind of have to do it in JavaScript. But I would argue while that is one way to approach solving the problem, to me that doesn't make the most sense. You'd almost want a way to have it be CSS and then layer stuff on top of it. So almost build a separate, that's why pre-compilers and stuff and post-compilers exist, right? It's to modify the existing one without to enhance it and augment it rather than almost replace it. I don't know. That's my short little rant on CSS in JS. So that said, we're here to talk about vbind, and vbind to me is one of those progressive enhancements on CSS without all the sort of craziness. So what we're gonna do is though, oh no, did I not save this stuff? I didn't. Is it the style block that got removed? Oh, I'm not worried about that. Okay, so git checkout, delete. Okay, that's fine. All right, now that we have that, I'm gonna jump over to the hello world actually, and we're gonna modify this file so that we have everything defined from there. And yep, I'm just gonna delete it all. Okay, so in this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna play around with this new vbind thing. And so in here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say user, and we're gonna say user preference. And then what I wanna do is I'm gonna say in here, we're gonna say color palette. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, hang on a sec. That's going to be it. Actually, let me save. Did that work? Did I stop the local dev server? Nope, I didn't. User preference. Here we go. Okay, user preference, color palette. Great. Let me add a horizontal line to make that obvious here. Boom, boom. Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about a common problem I think that we've kind of run into. Is like when we're declaring user preferences for things like color. Usually what you would do is you would just give users a certain number of colors, because otherwise you either have to inline styles or inherit everything. So in this particular case, let's say we wanted to tag the background with the user preference. So in this particular case, we would say background color. Like I'm gonna do red just to make it very, very obvious that this worked. Okay, great, that did work. So again, if I do blue and save, and then here, we'll see everything is changing. This is really hard on the eyes. So we're just gonna bring it down to a light gray. And kind of interesting, it's not detecting the hot module. But anyways, so this is great. But what if we wanna let the user choose what makes the most sense to them? Well, typically what you would do, how would we approach this? We would say, well, user will come in and there will be an input, let's call it text. We'll do a V model of color preference. And then let's practice what we learned. We learned about script setup today, right? So script setup, and I already have my ref sugar. You know what though? I don't want to use ref sugar here because I don't want to confuse people, because that is an experimental thing. So I'm just gonna do ref, and we'll say const color preference equals ref of an empty string. So if I save this here and make sure that it actually prints out, we'll show here that in this p tag we have color preference. And then save. And then here, if I type something like, FFFF, this is great. And so how will we take care of this? Well, I just realized we won't be able to hit body, actually. So actually, this already shows a limitation of this particular approach. But let's just say, for instance, the user color, let's make this simple for now. We're going to bind the style where the color of said, of the text within the H2, this we're going to say the color is going to be the color preference. And so by default, to make sure this actually does something, I'm going to make it white. So like this. So if I save, this is great. This worked. And then if I go ahead and change this now, let's do like 222, or wait, that's not going to do anything. What's 2D? Yeah, see, okay, so it's starting to work. 2DE, 2DF, okay, whatever. It's working. And so this is, okay, not a bad solution. It works, especially if you're just changing something like the color. Might not make the, this might be fine. But what if you wanted to actually have like a whole design system? You want to make it a reusable class. Well, then your next solution from this point is probably like, okay, well then my guess is I'm going to give them some choices. I'm going to have like blue, and this will be color blue. And then we're going to say red, color red. And then now what we're going to do here is we're going to take the class and we're going to make sure that it's bound to the color preference, right? And so I think this should work. So if I save, and now if I come in here and then I say blue, I don't think that did what I wanted to, because I'm pretty sure I know why. Because it's just going to say true, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be empty. 99% sure. Oh, it does say class blue. Do I need to refresh? Blue. Oh, there you go. Blue, red. Oh, that did work. Thank goodness. Okay. So this is working. But what's the problem with this? Well, the problem with this is that you're limited by basically however many number of colors you can define. So don't get me wrong. If you were to do this, you probably wouldn't even bother with the input text. You probably would have some sort of drop down that has like a fixed 5 different color combinations. But for the sake of creativity and scalability, wouldn't it be nice if you really could give people kind of an infinite choice, but without all the inline stylings? And so to me, this is one of the problems, and that vbind color or vbind will solve, which we'll see in a little bit. So what if instead, though, we said, okay, let's forget this. We're going to go ahead and use this thing called a color input from HTML. And in case you didn't know this, the color input is mind-boggling good. Because check it out. When I click on the color palette, it gives me the color palette clicker. So I can choose here. I can pick whatever I want. And then here you'll notice it's updating your reactive data exactly as you would expect. So to make this a little bit more interesting, to be honest, I'm gonna wrap all this. Actually, I'm just gonna wrap all this here in a div, and I probably should as a class. We won't even worry about that. We'll deal with that in a second. Okay, so I'm gonna actually remove this. We're not even gonna deal with this. We're gonna deal with the background color. Okay, so now that we have this, check this out. So if we go to style, and then we just go like background, oh wait, I realized we're in a JavaScript, so background color is going to be color preference, right? So just like this, if we save, you'll see that as I go ahead and choose different colors, it actually updates the background accordingly. Now, this is nice, once again, for inline styles, but what happens when you have something a bit more complex? Say, once again, you want the body to update. You could do this here. No, I would not. I just wouldn't recommend. No. Okay, so let's delete this. What if instead we could actually interpolate our JavaScript into the CSS block? In other words, if we did vbind around our color preference. So if I refresh and then we go, shoot. Vbind color, I did that right. Do I have to do scoped? No. Vbind color preference. Hang on, make sure this works. Is it because it's on body? Did I botch something? Yay, joys of light coding. There we go. Okay, so this worked. I guess the body was a. Why did it not like? Oh, I might know why. Because it's not within the scope of view, which would make sense, right? Because you're actually in your app context. You can't attach. No, that doesn't totally make sense to me. Let me switch this out again to HTML. And then this makes sense. Can I do this? Will this work? We're going to try it. This didn't change anything. So we're going to take a look. Hang on a sec. Count instance rendered message pass. Yeah, I don't care about that. We are going to go back to the wrapper. This is good. This is working. And so the reason why, the reason why this is cool though is, I realize I'm getting a little distracted, because if we could say at the root, I believe that's how you do the CSS root. Let me just double check real quick. Root. Oh, I did that wrong. It's like this. And then at the root, and then we can say that like background color is equal to, or is set to like the vars, because of course now I'm forgetting all my CSS vars. Subway time. Oh, could it be due to the being scoped? That is a good question. So hang on a second. Var color main black. Okay, so I am right. Vbind color preference. And now, without doing all this, I'm gonna look at this. This should be able to be var background color. Okay, so if this worked as I expected, I should have been on the other screen this whole time. So here, extraneous roots does not like it. Something's funky. Okay, clearly there are, I think I'm doing something a little bit weird with this, but vbind. Okay, so you saw the vbind color preference works here. So everything updates. Let me get rid of the scoped, and then we'll see here. Again, let me take a look at wrapper, and then this updates. Okay, so check this out. This is what's being generated. You'll notice that the element is generating a style tag on it, and that style tag basically has a custom CSS variable reference. And so the only thing though that I'm wondering then is from here, oh, check this out. They all inherit this. Okay. So meaning this variable now exists within everything. So if we take a look at this, this means, let me go ahead and take a look at this real quick. Bum, 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 bum. We bound it. Job exceptions wrap must be wrapped in quotes. It's static. Style. Yep. vbind color. Use CSS modules. Okay. So I think this is powerful because basically what you get the chance to do is, oh, I think I know. Okay, so the reason this is really nice now is that call it, let's see. We're going to do it like this. We're going to take this out and we're going to not even bother with the wrapper. And but what we're going to do though is we're going to say like the H1 has this particular style binding. So then if I go through this now, this updates. And then if I go through and say I also want the P elements to then also inherit the same background color, I get it now. All right, so now if we take a look, you'll see both of them are now being updated accordingly. And the reason this is powerful is because what we end up getting here is you'll notice that you're actually using CSS variables to define what's happening underneath. So if we come in here and look at the dev tools, what you'll notice here is that the background color is using the CSS variable rather than inlining styles. And if we think about this, this is really like this to me is the kind of progressive enhancement I'm talking about, where we use the JavaScript to help CSS out to say, hey, look, we know you want to use CSS variables because, again, think about it. We have teams of people being paid to optimize the browser rendering engine to do things. And there's a reason why all these people spend all this time on all these like specs for CSS and variables and stuff. And then the engineers will spend the time to implement the most performant aspect of it. Why wouldn't we want to leverage that? It seems, if you think about it, it seems rather silly to go, I don't care about like, to just go, I'm just going to do it entirely on my own and figure it out. And don't get me wrong, that's good for innovation in a lot of ways. But like for a lot of us building sites for people that, are, again, the problem are, I don't know, there's a lot of shared concerns. We don't need to be so creative about it. I would say the fact that we can leverage JavaScript to set CSS variables and then have it go from there, I think that's awesome. Because now this basically does mean that we can go through and just start defining some real interesting stuff. So it could be like border 10px dashed and then vbind color preference. And so if we save that now, and let's take a look at this again, we'll see, I don't see the border showing up. Why is the border not showing up? Oh, it's dashed. Oh, the background color is, oh, it is there. Ha, the background color is just overriding it. So, I mean, this is because this is interesting, right? Check this out. So then if we did it like this, you could technically say like, oh gosh, if you had like color detection, I don't know what we would do, but you could basically say like a computed value. We could say computed here, and we could say like text color. And then I don't know how I would do, I can't do this off my math off the head, but like call it, if you could measure darkness. And then we would say that it's a computed property where basically, if ref or if color preference dot value, let's call this a darkness attribute. This is totally not how this works. Is greater than like 50. Then we could like automatically invert text colors. And so for now, let's just say we know that if, then we could probably then, oh, I wonder if we could use, no, we do have that. We could do hue saturation lightness. Does the color input let me choose HSL by default? I'm gonna do this. HSL A. HSL. Can we like? Is there like a value type color? Does it have to be hex? Reacting to color changes. I don't care about that. Yeah, Internet Explorer doesn't support it. I'm well aware of this. Where is, you think there would be an attribute to tell you what the value always will be, but it looks like it has to be hex. So, okay, but basically think about it. Like if we had the HSLA value, you could take the lightness and just say like if it's past a certain point, basically return white. And the reason this is cool is because then basically we could then bind, I don't know, in this case, I said text color, but here. And so here, if we go ahead and take a look, you'll see, hey, check that out. We have our border, and it's creating this kind of fun pixelated design. That's kind of neat. Oh, what's up, Dave? I see Dave in the chat. So as Dave points out, so it looks like he knows this API a little bit better than me. It looks like the input color doesn't allow you to return an HSL value, which I guess makes sense because if it's only returning a string, then it might be a little bit trickier to, I don't know, I guess format it correctly. Would have been kind of nice to let you define that. But that said, okay, like there are plenty of libraries that can convert hex colors to HSLA, fair enough. And you would take that and just determine it. But now you'll see that this is great because if we look at the CSS being generated, it's still like we are still using CSS. The difference is Vue is helping us leverage those like the bindings as far as like user preference now to basically set some variables dynamically on the page while still leveraging the cascade, the specificity, and like all the beautiful CSS that we write to create these beautiful design systems. It is like a beautiful layer right on top of it. Oh, I see Dave in the chat. Are you excited about this? I hope you're excited about this as I am, because this to me is like, it's just like just enough JavaScript to make CSS that much more powerful on the fly. Yeah, so Jacob's saying it's a bit like responsive style mode. Yeah, in a sense, especially because there are so many times where I think when we're building applications that really certain user preferences will really change the styles, and rather than being forced to like manually create classes for every single scenario, it is nice to just go, okay, this is going to be a grid, and then the grid will take some CSS variables, and then it'll do its thing. It'll be beautiful, rather than like, I don't know, I've done some really hacky stuff with inline styles to make all that work. But with this, by merely setting CSS variables, we get all this power, and that to me is amazing. Okay, so I realized that we are at time. That said, let's take a look though, I would say, because honestly, if I was going to cover any two features, these are two of my favorite features, honestly. And, you know, for those of us using web components, there's a new basically defined custom. Oh, I realize this is probably so small for y'all. There's a new defined custom element method. And so basically for those in web components, be sure to check that out and the docs associated with it. And basically, as we can see here, there are a ton of performance improvements. Like, I mean, check this out. The ref implementation, thanks to Bas van Meers, like 260% faster read, 50% write. Like, I love that even though Vue 3 was already very performant, there is no stoppage from the team when it comes to like, we can make this better. And so, you know, if you're looking for things like performance things, there are basically, here's like I think, where was this from? Basically, I think they did like a performance test across like different frameworks. And you can see that at least the 3.2 beta, Vue actually gets quite close to Vanilla.js in a lot of cases, and extremely performant for swapping rows and that kind of thing. And again, we can see some similar numbers from different other frameworks as well. But it's nice to see that in the end, while Vue is shipping a lot of these sort of developer experience enhancements, they don't come at the expense of what we're shipping to users, which I think is really key. The other one, though, actually, that I would want to mention that I would say Natalia Tepluhina on the Vue core team had mentioned in her tweet is that the v-memo, or memo, depending on how you want to pronounce it, there's a new directive basically that basically the way to think about it is you're telling Vue that this part of the DOM no longer needs to be diff anymore. So it is a way basically to squeeze out some performance enhancements in certain scenarios, particularly as they say in this case, when you're doing like v4 lists, maybe certain parts really don't need to be changed and watched anymore. So you can kind of be like, basically just cache it and then take a long line with it. a long line. I don't even know what I was saying there, but basically saying like go focus on other things. Don't worry about this piece. So v-memo is basically a new directive that people should probably be aware of if they're seeing some problems. Again, more server rendering things and an effect scope API for more disposal timings for reactive effects. But basically, for the reason why I'm glossing over server-side rendering and effect scope is these are really more lower level APIs that really, unless you're working with server-side rendering, or more importantly, if you're a library author and you're dealing with like really nuanced reactivity things, I would say this stuff, don't worry about that. Like kind of put it on the back burner. So with that said, yeah, I think that's a wrap for today. Let's switch over to intermission. Really appreciate everybody here taking the time to hang out and all the questions here about, different, about the ref sugar, 3.2 and that kind of stuff. That is awesome. And again, really appreciate y'all for, again, having those observations and perspectives, because a lot of times I am pretty deep inside of what the team is discussing, and we try our best to keep it broad in perspective, but having y'all ask questions like this and give feedback, that is very important, because Vue is, it's built for the community, right? We don't have any company sort of directing why we're building things. We're building things so we want to make things easier for people to build awesome applications. So the more we can help you do that, and as you observe things or wonder why something is a certain way, ask. And I'll always do my best to answer it in the most honest and transparent way. So with that, thanks everyone for coming to hang out. It's been a lot of fun.